Hey dancers, welcome back to Broche Banter. I'm Julie, your host. Today we've got another Just Julie episode. I'll answer a bunch of questions for you guys about pointe shoes that I've got from the last couple of episodes that I've stacked up. I wanted to start first with just a little rant. I got a comment on a social media post and it was just really interesting observation, and I'm curious what do you guys think about it? This person just said, from her opinion or observation, as adult ballet dancers, sometimes we do berate ourselves. We are often our own toughest critics, but also we are sometimes shamed for thinking that we might actually be quote unquote okay. And she said, notice I can't even bring myself to say that we're good. It's just a symptom of the overall ballet culture, which does seep over into recreational ballet. I thought this was such an interesting comment because you do see people post videos online of them dancing and them practicing ballet, and the comments and the response to the videos are so different depending on how the person positions it. If the person positions it like, I'm terrible, help me, I'm so bad, I need corrections, then it's so funny that people are sometimes like nicer to the person in the comments and will offer kind critiques and helpful feedback and helpful suggestions. Whereas if someone posts something that they don't self-deprecate or they don't have any disclaimer that they are bad, then you'll get people just tearing them to shreds. It might be a similar level video that they're posting, but it's just so interesting how people treat them. If you post something appearing as if you are proud of it or that you're happy with how it went, then you do get people just wanting to give you lots of kind of really harsh critiques and, you know, you didn't do this right, you didn't do that right, you missed this, whatever. They just can be very harsh about it. So it's really interesting, the perception around dance. I'm not sure this is limited to adults either. I think it's with all ages. Ballet has this kind of culture to it. Of course, ballet is just so funny because it does have a quote unquote perfect. It does have sort of an ideal standard that ballet itself has created. Whether or not we mere mortals are meant to live up to it, I don't know, but it does have a sort of ideal or perfect, and we are often compared to it when we post a video or a photo online. Even when you watch your own videos and photos, you sometimes compare yourself to what you imagine the ideal is. This is so different from how your dancing is experienced in person in real time, not just in that flat video form. It's really an unforgiving format, and the internet can be unforgiving in general. So anyways, that was just a really interesting comment. I'm curious if you all have noticed anything about that, if you have any thoughts or feedback on that comment. But let's get into some questions about pointe shoes. So a couple on preparing for pointe. Okay, so there's a question about my classes, why I have sometimes offering seated pre-pointe classes and sometimes I offer standing pre-pointe classes. What are the areas that we improve when we're doing one or the other? So there's several areas of pointe readiness. You've got how dexterous your toes are. So if your toes can move independently, if they spread out from each other, if they can point and articulate without your ankle moving, if you can move all of that separately. And then you've got the flexibility of your ankles and toes. That's different from the dexterity. You can have very flexible feet but not very dexterous, and vice versa. Then you've got the strength of your lower legs. So you've got the strength of your calves, your soleus, your intrinsic muscles in your arches. You've got the strength of all of that. And then you also have the alignment of your ankles as well, which is if you are sickling, if your ankles are straight, if your ankles know how to wing. All of these are really important areas for pointe readiness. I mean, not to mention your ballet technique. That's like obviously a big part of it too. But just specifically with your feet for pointe. Having said that, all that is good for ballet too. I mean, it's good for actually non-dancers too. You see in pre-pointe the same stuff that you'll get as a runner if you're in rehab for your feet or for plantar fasciitis. It's really exercises that are good for everybody. So that's why I encourage people, start pre-pointe from day one of your ballet journey. It's going to help you with your feet. You need to have stronger feet for ballet. It's going to help you not get injured. It's going to help you be able to do releve. Even if you don't want to go on pointe or you think pointe is 5 or 10 years away, in your mind, if you perceive that it's that far away, you should be starting pre-pointe. Your feet will be happier. You'll be able to stand for longer periods of time. You'll be more comfortable in your footwear around town. So start pre-pointe. Okay, anyways, enough of that diatribe. So seated versus standing. I separate these based on different areas of pointe readiness. So if you're trying to work on your lower leg strength, you can definitely do some seated exercises, but with resistance. So pushing into a TheraBand or pushing into a Pilates ball with your foot and your toes. But really, to get stronger lower legs, you should be standing. You should be doing weight-bearing exercises on those feet. If you're not yet ready for standing releves, you can also sit and stick a weight on your knee, so you can do calf raises with a little bit of weight, but not your whole body weight. So that criteria, you really would be working on standing. But there's other criteria that are harder to work on standing and easier to work on sitting. So for example, if you're working on improving the dexterity of your toes, you want your toes to move independently, it's much easier to work on that sitting because you have access to your feet, you can touch your toes with your hands, and you can work on improving that a little bit more in a little bit more close quarters if you're sitting on the floor. The nature of the exercises is different depending on if you're working on any of those 4 criteria that I mentioned: dexterity, flexibility, strength, or alignment. You should be standing or sitting depending on what you are working on. If you haven't picked up your copy of the Pointe edition of the Broche magazine yet, this is a great resource. It's more than just a magazine. It really lays out all the criteria for readiness, pictures of every single criteria, exercises for all of them, and a daily planner for actually getting ready to go on pointe. So it lays all of this out, shows you the difference between the seated exercises and the standing exercises, and gives you everything in kind of one place to look at all together. Okay, next question. What is the difference between demi-pointe shoes and pointe shoes? When do I wear them? How often should I practice? Do I need to use demi-pointe shoes to become pointe ready? Okay, the thing about demi-pointe shoes is really interesting. It's not universally agreed on whether we do or don't need to use demi-pointe shoes in our journey from flat to pointe. What demi-pointe shoes are is they give you the hardness of a pointe shoe without the support to actually stand up all the way on your toes. So they don't have the shank, which is the part that goes up under your foot to give you that support, but they do have a hard box and a hard sole and then a really strong, thick satin surrounding your feet. So parts of pointe work are not very much a natural transition from flat to pointe. I think one of the things that surprises people the most when they start pointe work is actually how hard it is to balance on flat. It feels like you're standing in a tiny canoe when you're wearing a pointe shoe. Depending on how thick your shank is, it's more or less bad, basically, but it feels like you're standing in a tiny boat. And so developing the strength in your feet and ankles to just hold your balance on flat is actually pretty tough. That's one of the benefits of using a demi-pointe shoe before you transition to pointe, is you can get your feet ready for the feeling of pointe shoes. You can start building up some of the calluses. You can get used to the feeling, and you can start building up your balance on flat. So when you get your pointe shoes, you're not so shocked by that sensation, and you have more mental space to work on actually getting up on your toes, which is like a whole separate project. But the big detractors of demi-pointe shoes, especially championed by Lisa Howell, who's an amazing dance physiotherapist down out of Australia, is that if you get in demi-pointe shoes too early, before you learn how to use your toes, the thing is your teacher can't see your toes anymore, so they can't offer you any advice if you're doing it right or wrong. They can't see if your toes are working properly, they can't see if your toes are curling or crunching, they can't see what's happening inside of your shoes, and so they can no longer help you with that technique. So if you're only in demi-pointe shoes and your teacher hasn't had a chance to really understand how your feet are working, they're not going to know if you have correct technique inside the demi-pointe shoes. I mean, there's some factors you can see from the outside to see if you're doing it correctly, but your toes could be doing some different things inside the shoe that you really can't see without clear pointe shoes. Side note, I would love a pair of clear pointe shoes for demonstrating and for teaching. If anybody knows how to make a clear pair of pointe shoes, hit me up. So demi-pointe shoes can cause you to develop some bad habits if you're not strong enough to pointe them. And then your feet will be compensating in all kinds of ways because you're not strong enough to manipulate them, you're not ready for them, and then your feet will just do their best to try to operate the demi-pointe shoes. Even just on flat, like doing tendus, doing décolleté, doing coup de-pied, and all these things, if you're not ready for demi-pointe shoes yet, if you get in them too soon, then they can actually make your journey to pointe slower because you're going to be developing bad habits. You might get any injuries from your toes not working correctly and the tendons. And so that's kind of the main reason why not to use demi-pointe shoes. My opinion on it has changed and morphed over the years. When I first started, I was very much in the don't use demi-pointe shoes camp. They're not necessary. You can work completely on flat to pointe, and I do still take the majority of people in my pointe program from flat straight to pointe, but sometimes there'll be people in the middle where they're very close to being ready for pointe, but they need a bit more strength in their calf. They're not quite getting high enough on their demi-pointe, and demi-pointe shoes can be really nice to help get them that last mile of strength to get ready for pointe. Sometimes they just need more resistance in their ballet class to help them get a little bit stronger to be ready for pointe. So I'll sometimes recommend demi-pointe shoes for somebody who is like right on the border of being ready for pointe, but I just don't feel like they're strong enough. Their feet just aren't there yet. They're not quite high enough on the demi-pointe, but they are coming to class consistently, and we can just get a little bit more bang for their buck and a little bit faster progress if they do use those demi-pointe shoes. Having said that, when I do suggest Demi Pointe shoes, I always ask them not to wear the Demi Pointe shoes for regular ballet class. I always ask that they wear their Demi Pointe shoes for my specific barre and pointe shoes class, because in that class I talk about how to use your pointe shoes. It's all on flat. I teach the class entirely on flat, but it's all about how to articulate properly with the shoes, how to use your toes to bend the shank into Demi Pointe, how to use your toes to shape the shoe, how to do a tablier properly working through the box, how to do a chassé properly, how to do all these movements properly with the pointe shoe or the Demi Pointe shoe on their feet. I don't recommend to anybody at least in my classes, that they get Demi Pointe shoes and just wear them to regular class, because you're really not going to get instruction on how to use them or how to properly engage your feet within the Demi Pointe shoes. And like that's a big part of it. If you're not using the Demi Pointe shoes properly, they're not going to get you to pointe any faster because you're just not using them properly. So doing that right is a key step to get all the way to pointe. So anyways, it's pretty circumstantial. A lot of people can go straight from flat to pointe, but in those cases where you're pretty ready, you have good base of technique, but you need a little bit more oomph to get you up there, that's a good place where I can get you in those Demi Pointe shoes and get you used to those sensations before we get all the way up onto pointe. Oh, I think I missed one part of this. How often should I practice with them, and how should I practice with them? Yeah, so how often with the Demi Pointe shoes? I don't recommend doing only Demi Pointe shoes. I don't even recommend doing only pointe shoes. I still recommend taking barre in your flat shoes at least once a week. And then you can do Demi Pointe shoes the other days, but you still want to be able to have that connection with the floor, to be able to spread out your toes, to be able to push your feet into the floor and keep building that connection. I don't recommend replacing your soft shoes with Demi Pointe shoes entirely. I do recommend continuing to have a relationship with the floor and with your feet. Having said that, if you are getting ready for pointe, you should be doing classes a few times a week, not just once a week. You should be doing classes a few times a week. So you could have one in your flat shoes, and maybe 2 to 3 in your Demi Pointe shoes, maybe even better 2 in your flat shoes and 2 in your Demi Pointe shoes. So I would try to split it like that so you do have a good relationship with the floor and you don't lose that connection. Class and soft shoes allow you to focus on other things, not just your feet, because Demi Pointe shoes really fog up your brain and they take up a lot of mental space, and then you're not able to focus on your technique, on your posture, on your alignment, on your port de bras, on your core, on the other things that are also really, really important for getting up on pointe. So don't distract yourself with the Demi Pointe shoes 100% of the time. Use your flat shoes sometimes, build the other areas of technique, and then you'll be able to get up on pointe. Okay, so getting into pointe, once you get into pointe, okay, does pointe hurt? Just point blank, does pointe hurt? This person had asked me after she had watched my Swan Lake vlog. If you haven't already seen it, it's super great. Really fun video. People are having a great time with it, where I got to perform in Swan Lake in Germany. Check it out on my YouTube channel. But she was asking, after watching that video, how I was saying in the final show that I was so ready to take my pointe shoes off, because we had a rehearsal and then we had the show, and it was like, 4 hours in our pointe shoes or something like that. And I was just so ready to take them off. She's like, what did you mean? What did you mean by that? What do people mean when they say they're ready to take their pointe shoes off? And I guess I would say in that particular case, it's very much like wearing a very uncomfortable pair of shoes to a wedding. You're standing on your feet are like going kind of numb in certain places because there's a lot of pressure on them in certain places, and your feet are just like cramped. They're small. They're in a small environment that's not letting them move in their natural way. And so they're tired and they're being smushed, and the same part keeps pushing up against the same part over and over again, and so it's just getting a little bit sensitive, and you're ready to take them off. It feels like a great relief. The blood comes rushing to your feet. It feels amazing when you take them off. So pointe doesn't hurt. It shouldn't be so painful that you want to cry or that you want to quit. And that's a sign you're in the wrong shoe or the wrong padding, or that you have some work that you need to do inside with your technique to help support you up on pointe. But they can be uncomfortable. Especially standing on flat in pointe shoes, which in that case, we were in rehearsal, so there was a lot of standing around on flat. And actually standing around on flat, your feet, especially if you have compressible feet like mine, which is where they can squish when you get up on pointe, the bones squish together. On flat, your feet are very wide, and on pointe, your feet are more narrow. So when you're on flat, your feet get more constricted in the pointe shoe than when you're up on pointe. So for someone like me, it's more comfortable to be up on pointe than it is to be down on flat, just because on flat, the pointe shoes are so constrictive versus when you're up on pointe. So on that particular day, there was a lot of standing around. There was a lot of just on flat feet, which just makes your toes go a little bit numb. It's kind of uncomfortable. The shoes are a little bit too tight if your feet are wider on flat than they are up on point. Sometimes you hear about a blister or calluses or things like that, and that's when you have a single pressure point inside the shoe that just keeps rubbing on that part of your foot as you go up and down. Your foot shouldn't be sliding too much in the point shoe, but if there is some extra moisture and it is sliding, you'll sometimes get those pressure points in there, but those really shouldn't be the norm. Like if that's happening regularly, then you want to be looking at different shoes or different padding, some other way to support your feet. I mean, these things will happen every once in a while, but they shouldn't be like every single time you're coming away from class like bleeding and bruised. Same with bruised toenails. Like these, it does happen sometimes that you bruise your toenails, but if you keep your toenails clipped, I have a video on cutting your toenails. Watch the video on cutting your toenails. There's a specific way to keep them flat across. If you keep your toenails clipped and you have good padding and support, then your toes should not be banging the bottom. They should not be banging the floor. You should be lifted up in the point shoe and held up by your metatarsals so you're not banging and putting all your weight just on the tip of your toes. So does it hurt? Yes and no. It's always a really tricky question. In short spurts, no, it should not hurt. For very long periods of time, it can get more uncomfortable, and the discomfort can grow. Okay, how do I know when I'm ready to venture off the bar in point shoes? Okay, great question. This is such a personal timeline. Some dancers are ready to venture off the bar really quickly, and some dancers take years, and some dancers never even want to venture off the bar, and they love their bar and they find point to be just fine holding on to the bar. This is extraordinarily personal, especially when it comes to adults. Everybody has their own sort of tolerance for risk and for fear and for the risk of falling or feeling that uncertainty of being away from your bar up on a pair of stilts. So I find that this is a very, 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 very wide range of people ready to get off the bar. Some people are ready when they graduate my 16-week beginner point program, and some people are not ready 3, 4, 5 years down the road. They still don't want to venture off the bar. Maybe they're okay with one hand on the bar or starting to get comfortable with that, but they're not too keen on venturing off the bar. Maybe a couple of barres here and there, but they're not too keen on it. So I really would encourage you, when it comes to venturing off the bar in your point shoes, not to push yourself there before the appetite comes. You'll start to get curious about letting go of the bar, and if you haven't started to get curious about letting go of the bar, then you're not ready yet. There will come a time when you're like, I bet I could do that without the bar, or you feel you're not leaning over the bar so much. You feel that you were upright in that position. You feel you didn't need the bar so much to help you. You start to feel that need for the bar starting to lessen, and then it's time to start venturing off the bar. Now, when you do venture off the bar, start small. Start with a pas de barre, backside front. Start with a susu. If you like scooping susu or you like releve from 2 legs to 1, start there. Start with a barre on 2 feet, alternating feet, barre, maybe not even traveling, just 1 foot and then the other. Try to do a piqué susu. Try to do a few moves on flat, like a glissade on flat. Maybe try to do some tendus on flat, just to get your balance. Remember I said being on point on flat is like balancing in a little canoe. So just doing tendus, just doing dégagés, just doing center bar, basically in your point shoes can be really helpful. That's also one of the classes I teach, is center bar in your point shoes, where we just do pliés, tendus, rond de jambes, fondus, all on flat, but wearing our point shoes away from the bar, just to build that confidence away from the bar and to get you used to not holding on while you're standing in your point shoes. So much of going up is starting down. So if you're not comfortable balancing down, you can't get up. If you're not comfortable in plié without the bar, you can't go releve. If you're not comfortable on 1 leg fondu, you can't do pas de barre. So first step is getting you used to regular ballet movements without your bar, and then you can start to add some of those that I mentioned, the pas de barre, the susu, the piqué susu, the barres, little movement. You can add some port de bras while you're up there to make it a little bit dancier and just mix it up. But start slow and just start to build that relationship with your feet. One more point I'll mention on this is that you're building a relationship with your point shoes. Your point shoes they require an amount of trust in order for your body to agree to do these movements, either at the bar or in the center. And if you think about any relationship that is a difficult relationship where you do not have trust with a person, you take time, you take little risks, and you build evidence that this person is trustworthy. Little bites, little risks, little things here and there that help you see that this is a trustworthy person. I want you to treat your point shoes the same way. Don't just go in there trusting with your whole heart. You could get your heart broken. This is part of it. This is part of that process of building the trust. Take step by step. Try one thing, see how it goes. If you're not ready yet, back off, go back to the bar, try one hand on the bar, step by step, small movements, building trust with your feet, building trust with your nervous system, building trust with your floor, building trust with your body, that your feet are going to catch you when you do get up there. It's so important that you have that trusting relationship, because if you don't, that's when your knees bend. You go for a PK, your knee bends. That's a trust issue. Your shoulders go up. That's a trust issue. You lean forward. That's a trust issue. You lean back. That's a trust issue. Your technique will be so different at the bar than in the center in your point shoes because of this lack of trust. Your trust or lack thereof will just take all of your technique away. Same goes for pirouettes. If you're afraid, your technique goes out the window and your body just does what it needs to survive. So venture off the bar step by step when the appetite comes, and little by little build that trusting relationship with your shoes and with yourself. And last question. I love this question. How is pointe different for adults than for kids? Okay, I love this question because it is literally like teaching two different topics. If you give a kid a pair of pointe shoes, first of all, a lot of studios will not even let the kids take the pointe shoes home. If you give a kid a pair of pointe shoes, the first thing they're doing is like jumping in them on pointe. They stand up on pointe and they jump around. They're turning, they're trying PK turns, they're trying every move that they know in ballet, but in the pointe shoes. It is just, as someone who started pointe as an adult, and maybe you did too if you're watching this, or maybe you're dreaming of it, when you give an adult a pair of pointe shoes, it's so different. Let's say I'm teaching a pointe class and I'm demonstrating that we get up on pointe. Okay, if you're demonstrating this to a bunch of kids, they're all up on pointe, playing, hanging on the bar, doing stuff. If you do it with the adults, they're all completely on flat. They're not even necessarily setting their shoe up on the box. Everybody's standing completely on flat until you invite them and you say, okay, let's all try it together. Let's go up on pointe. You really have to encourage and prod the adults to want to go up on pointe. It's very unusual that you get somebody who's like a kid, fearless like a kid, who's just flying across the floor and you have to take their pointe shoes away from them so that they don't hurt themselves. It's so different. The adults are very, very cautious and very they really want to know that they're doing it correctly and safely, and they really worry about injuries. They really value their feet. They value the ability to walk around and be mobile in their life, and they have a worry that pointe might take that from them. And so they are very, very cautious when it comes to their pointe shoes, when it comes to trying new things in their pointe shoes, when it comes to letting go or doing things that give them a little bit of a scary sensation. The other thing that's different, though, on the flip side of it, is for adults, pointe shoes are often sort of the epitome that they can do it. They're often a sort of paradigm shifting thing when they achieve pointe work, that they see themselves in a new light, that they see themselves as a person who can overcome challenges and who can do hard things and who can commit to themselves and who can commit to an art form and who can stick with something for the years that it takes to be able to get ready to go on pointe. And they often really value and revere the pointe shoes as an incredibly meaningful part of their journey, not only through ballet but through life, that they really feel that pointe shoes are this sort of symbol that they might one day belong in the world of ballet, that they can be the dancer that they always dreamed of. And so pointe shoes hold a very, very deep weight for adults, whereas the kids, it may not have that same sense. I know some do fall in love with pointe, and not to diminish how much kids love pointe, but for adults, they've been yearning for these pointe shoes for maybe even decades. Sometimes you'll hear the story that the person quit ballet at 13 right before they were about to go on pointe, and they've been thinking about it for 40 years, and they finally get on pointe in their 50s, and that person has been dreaming of pointe shoes for 50 years. That's a pent-up dream that they finally achieved decades later, and you can imagine the weight and the gravity and the joy and the fulfillment that they feel when they get that pair of pointe shoes. So it's a very different experience. How long you've been working towards it, everything you had to overcome to get there, all the injuries you had to work through from your past life, all of the challenges you had to work through, and so pointe can be extraordinarily meaningful in an extremely deep way for adults who have achieved their first pair of pointe shoes. In that sense, I think there's a bit of a stigma sometimes around adults who want to go on pointe, and people will say, like, you should just slow down, you shouldn't want to go on pointe. There's so much more to ballet than just pointe shoes. And if you have been doing ballet for a long time, for decades, you might agree with that. Yeah, you might say that there's so much technique you can work on without pointe shoes. There's so much you can learn about your pelvis and your arms and your head and your artistry and all these other facets of ballet other than pointe shoes, and that it's not the end all be all. But for somebody who has that dream specifically of pointe shoes in their heart, there's really no convincing a person who wants a pair of pointe shoes that they should not care about that dream. That's like, you can't talk someone out of their dream, and you shouldn't try to talk someone out of their dream. You should really support them in how to help them safely and successfully reach that goal, and not suggest that, like, oh, don't worry about it, there's more to ballet than pointe. Like, I don't think that's the right approach. I can understand why a teacher might say that to somebody, especially because it is really hard to go on pointe. And if you do suggest to somebody that they can go on pointe, you're suggesting to them like a potentially multi-year journey of getting ready and a lot of consistency and a lot of commitment, and not every adult will take you up on that journey. But for the ones who do, and for the ones who really want that, I think it's worth explaining what the process is, what it looks like, and that it is possible for them if they're going to put in the work towards it, instead of suggesting like, oh, it's not that big of a deal, like there's so much more to ballet than that, and sort of like almost like belittling that dream or belittling that goal. I mean, I can see why it happens, but also I think for you, if you're listening to this and you have that dream of pointe shoes, I think there's if you're one of the people who's willing to put in the work, I think you should go for it, and I think you should do it, because it's going to be, like I said in that last bit, just, I mean, it can be an incredibly fun and incredibly rewarding and experience in your life, that you get to get your first pair of pointe shoes, and you get to have a first pair of pointe shoes sash, and you get to show all your friends and your kids and your family, and it's really a truly incredible thing to get that first pair of pointe shoes. So last, I'll just finish up with, this wasn't a question, but since we're on the pointe topic, I'll just wrap up with one more thought about pointe work for adults, and that is the progression once you are on pointe. So there's a couple of sort of level humps of progress, if you will. So when you first get your pair of pointe shoes, so let's say we've already done the journey to pointe, you got approved, you got fitted, whatever, you get this first pair of pointe shoes. You've got a couple of hurdles that you need to go through when you go on pointe. Everybody gets these at different times, but you'll go through these different hurdles. So first of all, the beginning, you got to learn how to operate your pointe shoes. Okay, your pointe shoes do nothing for you. It seems like how expensive they are. They should like do a little bit more for you, but they really don't do that much for you. You have to bend, you have to articulate them with your feet. You have to point your toes when you're standing up on pointe to actually hold yourself up there and create a really beautiful line. You have to shape your shoe into a beautiful pointe. When you do a tendu, when you do a coup d'epied, it doesn't shape itself into these positions. Okay, you have to shape it into these positions. So first of all, you need to learn how to operate the pointe shoes. That's like the beginning. You have to learn the basics. You have to learn what changes. How do you do all the basic moves? A tendu, a passe, a step, a walk, a tendu, all of the basic movements of how you operate your pointe shoes. Then you got to learn how to get up and down. Getting up and down is a big deal. The specific ways you get up and down, you have your from 2 legs to 2 legs. So your sous-sus, you've got 3 different ways to sous-sus, scooping both feet at the same time, moving front to back, or moving back to front. You've got from 2 feet to 2 feet échappé, from together to out to the side, either second or in fourth. Then you've got your 2 feet to 1 feet, 2 feet to 1 foot, your relevé coup d'epied or your relevé passe. You've got your 1 foot to the other foot. You've got your pas de barre. You've got your piqués, whether it's a piqué straight underneath you or a piqué sous-sus out to the side. And then you've got your relevé from one to that same one, your single leg relevé or your roll down on that 1 foot. You've also got your regular bourrées, so bourrée, fast movements to travel across the floor. So you learn your basic movements in your pointe shoes, how to operate them and make them look pretty, and also how to get up and down. Okay, that's like a big project. In my program, that usually takes people about 4 months. I have my 16-week beginner program. That's about 4 months of time right there to just learn the basics of how to use your pointe shoes. Then there comes a period of time in the middle there where you know the basics, and it takes you a long time to get comfortable with the basics. This is like sometimes for some people like a couple of years of just only working on those same things repeatedly over and over again for a few years. This is where we often see a lot of drop off. This area, this time period is difficult because of a couple reasons. Number one, if you don't have good shoes yet, if you haven't found your right shoe, you're going to really fight your shoe through this period of time. I've talked a lot about pointe shoes on former episodes, so I won't dig back into that whole story. But basically, if you have a shoe where you're not able to get over the box, you'll have a really hard time balancing. And if you've got a shoe that is causing you to sickle or pulling you off or causing a lot of injuries or causing a lot of pain where you can't stay up long enough to actually get any work done, then you're going to have a really hard time progressing through this middle phase of getting comfortable with the basics. So this middle phase also involves finding your shoe. And I think a lot of people incorrectly see this as like a setback or like they're taken away from this part, but it is just part of this middle journey. Like this middle journey includes two parts. Number one, getting strong enough and comfortable, and number two, finding your shoe. These are two parallel tracks that you have to walk in this middle section of getting comfortable with the basics. And finding your correct shoe might be several months, it might be several years, it might be a very long time. If you listen to my story, it was several years for me before I found a shoe that I felt was really workable. And so it's a period of time here where you're both trying to find a good shoe and you're trying to get comfortable with these basic movements that I just listed of how to get up and down and how to operate your shoes. So this period of time is expensive because you have to buy a lot of different pairs of pointe shoes to try them all, and can have slow progress depending on how your hunt for the shoe is going, depending on how frequently you're able to make it to class, how consistent you're able to be, and just depending on your nervous system, like how comfortable you are with trying new things, with taking risks, with some of these more scary sensations that go up on your pointe shoes. This period of time can be a great time to try to learn some modified variations at the bar. I teach a type called artistry on pointe where we learn some fun combinations but holding onto the bar, so you can start to quote unquote dance with your pointe shoes but still with your bar and start to feel like you're having fun while you're doing all these releves, because otherwise you're just doing releves forever until you're blue in the face over and over again. This is also a great time for modified variations at the bar, such as like I do four little swans on pointe holding onto the bar, Paquita holding onto the bar, super fun one to do, Bluebird holding onto the bar, Fairy Doll, T variation from Nutcracker. These are all super fun to do a modified version holding onto the bar and sort of give you a like project to work on while you're in this middle phase of finding your right shoe and getting comfortable with the basics. Otherwise, it can be pretty boring and you can start to feel like you're not making any progress, even though you are. You're building strength and comfort, but it can start to feel like you're stagnating there without something to keep you a little bit more occupied and interested. And then we've got the last phase of, well, I don't know if it's last. Is there ever a last in ballet? No. The next phase of pointe, which is doing regular ballet stuff in your pointe shoes. So working up towards pirouettes in your pointe shoes, working up towards a regular bar in your pointe shoes, working up towards normal center combinations in your pointe shoes, and basically taking all your vocabulary from your flat shoes and imprinting it onto your pointe shoes. Now this can be a challenging thing to do because there's a lot of vocabulary, and also everything you know on flat, you have to sort of relearn on pointe and practice and relearn with your nervous system on pointe. Each of these take step by step, right? Like if you're taking your pointe shoes into a center class, it's gonna be really, really hard. Like you're gonna need to go multiple levels down into a center class with your pointe shoes. Always ask your teacher first if they are okay with you taking pointe shoes into a regular class. As a teacher, sometimes it's extremely distracting if someone has pointe shoes in a beginner class, because the type of corrections you're trying to give to the beginners are not at all related to the corrections that the pointe shoe dancers need. And so as a teacher, sometimes it can be really hard to teach both audiences at once. So I'm not saying I recommend just taking your pointe shoes into ballet class and expecting your teacher to be able to teach you in context with everybody else. Speak with them first, ask if it's appropriate, and try to find a good place for that. Ask first before you take your pointe shoes in to a regular ballet class. But as you're starting to learn regular ballet stuff in your pointe shoes, it's interesting because you're not really a beginner in that you know what the vocabulary is. It's just a matter of getting it to work in your pointe shoes. Like you know what a pas de bourrée, you know what a tombe pas de bourrée is, you know what a pirouette from fourth is, you know what all these movements are. It's just a matter of getting them in your pointe shoes. So it takes a different type of practice getting these things on pointe versus just a beginner class where you're learning what these things are. In pointe, you're learning about how momentum works to get up even higher up onto a pair of stilts. You're learning about how to not be afraid. You're learning about how to control your shoes. You're learning about the special techniques and tactics for doing these movements in your pointe shoes that are different from doing them in your soft shoes. And so this phase of moving to normal ballet stuff in your pointe shoes, or even learning an actual ballet variation, a classical ballet variation in your pointe shoes, it's a really big phase and a really big project, and kind of exciting, where people really start to feel this very rewarding feeling that they're finally quote unquote dancing on pointe, that they feel like they can express themselves in their pointe shoes and they're kind of finally dancing on pointe. All of this that I just outlined is for many people several years worth of time. So if you do get on point and you really want to get that feeling of dancing on point, stick with it through all those parts of the journey. Don't skip the part where you search for your shoe. Don't skip the part where you experiment with padding. Don't skip the part where you find a shoe that works for your foot. Don't skip that part. Don't stop doing pre-pointe. Keep working on your feet. In fact, you should work on your feet more once you have your pointe shoes, so your feet are always ready for you. Even if you take a little break, your feet are ready for you when you're coming back into pointe, and you're nice and safe as you get back up onto your pointe shoes. But stick with it throughout this whole journey, because then the pointe shoes really can kind of almost magnify or augment anything you do artistically. They are different than your soft shoes. They give you a different type of dynamic. They give you a different type of thing, but they can really make things look very cool, and you can do different cool effects that you can't do in your soft shoes and with your ballet flats. So if you really have that dream of dancing on point, keep going through all these phases that I mentioned, and know that they're all a normal part of the pointe process and a normal part of getting to that stage of dancing in your pointe shoes as an adult. So anyways, dancers, I hope this was a helpful episode answering your questions. Let me know if you have more questions. Drop me a line at hello@brocheballet.com, and I would love to answer your questions on a future podcast episode. So until next time, I wish you very happy dancing.